Okay, I guess we're going to get started then. So thanks everyone for coming today. As Zach just mentioned, we had a bit of change up in schedule, so Colin went earlier to accommodate Phil, who got travel delays, so Phil's going to be in the spot after me. I want to tell you two stories today. I want to tell you the story of kind of how digital identity has unfolded in Canada and kind of what's in front of us. So I'm going to tell you two stories about how this all came to be and kind of what's coming. Before I do that, I just want to kind of tell you a story about the experience that we've been having in Canada. And so you've all seen this allegory before of the 6 academics. They're on a trip and they encounter an elephant, and they're all blind, and so they're each trying to discover and describe what the elephant means to them. And what we're taught from this allegory is that although each of them could correctly describe what they saw, none of them could correctly describe the elephant. That's the lesson we're told to take away from this story. But I think there's a more interesting takeaway that we could learn from this story, and it's actually the story we've been having in Canada around digital identity. And the lesson is this: it took all of them to see the elephant. And so with that kind of insight, I want to talk about what's been happening in Canada, how the players that came to be in the Canadian model got there. And it's really this journey of discovery about each of the specific pieces they had to offer. The story in Canada got started. We started out as a fintech payment company. That was what our business was going to be. We thought it'd be really neat if consumers could pay in the home the same way they did in the store by just tapping a credit card on a machine, and we thought this was going to be awesome. And you know what? This is actually going to be important as we get down track with the identity story, but that's kind of where we started. But it was interesting is that one of our steering committee meetings, one of the banks kind of said to us, hey, can you guys go figure out how to open a bank account on the internet? And so it was kind of off task, but they asked us to just investigate what it would mean to allow the banks to open a bank account on the internet. This was back in around 2008. And so we started talking to the provinces and in Canada, the state driver's license folks. And I was going around talking to these people, and what they would basically say to me, you know, the driver's license is not an identity document. It just proves you know how to drive. And so they didn't even want to engage in the discussion. And so we were kind of saying, well, yeah, I kind of get that what you're saying here, but let's just be real. Banks and telcos and everybody else, airplanes, you know, hotels, everybody's relying on this document for identity. And so we wound up talking to all the different provinces, but the one place we got to was in BC. And we were talking to BC and say, hey, the banks have a real challenge here. The driver's license, the gateway document to identity theft, and they want a way to verify the document's real. And by the way, they're willing to pay. And BC kind of looked at us and said, I'm glad that the banks are willing to pay, but I don't care about their problem. I've got my own problem. I said, okay, well, what's your problem? The challenge we have in BC is we've got 9 million healthcare cards in circulation, and we only have 4.5 million people in the province. And by the way, big eyes at the front here. And by the way, we'd like to serve up healthcare records on the internet too. And so they weren't interested in the money. And so this was the first part of the elephant. They did not care about the money. That for-profit government is not something as a policy objective that you hear a lot. And so they weren't motivated by money. They wanted to figure out how to solve up more information online, at the same time shut down this fraud problem. And so we listened to their story about what they were trying to solve, and what we said to them in the end is, hey, I know you think you run the healthcare system, but you don't. You run the payment system for the healthcare system, which is a very different thing. And if I told you the way the payment system works, is you walk into Starbucks downstairs here and you say, my name's Andre, my credit card number is 1234. You say that's the dumbest thing you've ever heard. But that's actually how healthcare runs in Canada, and here too in the US for that matter. If you know the healthcare number, you can walk in and get healthcare. And so what we persuaded them to do, through their journey, what they'd been through, and like experience what we shared our experiences, we persuaded them to put an EMV chip card inside their driver's license and healthcare card. And they've done that. And so the cool thing is now that we've taken all these fraudulent cards out of circulation, that's amazing, like that's taken a ton of cost out for BC. And the next thing is that actually it's done a good thing in that now that we have these trustworthy cards, we can actually help do the thing we kind of set out to do, which is actually helping banks open a bank account on the internet, because now we can prove the driver's license is real. And so this village, it takes a village to make an identity concept, is that in Canada, it's not any single player. No single player can do this by themselves. We need them all. They each have something the other player wants. So that's what a true identity ecosystem is all about. It's give to get. You have something that the other players need, but you also need something yourself. What BC needed was to get out of the password reset businesses and put stuff on the internet, and they knew no matter what they did, it was going to be low velocity, they were going to be stuck in password resets. So they wanted to kind of depend on the banks to help them solve their access challenge. The banks were having a challenge that the driver's license was being used to fraudulently create accounts at banks and create all sorts of financial damage for customers. The telcos, like the banks, wanted to make sure that the people walking to get phones on a cell phone plan were really those people, because when you walk out of the store with a $1,000 iPhone and you don't have a real identity, the telco never gets the money back. And the feds also were suffering from a challenge of delivering more healthcare information online. And so each of these players, the federal government, the states or provinces, the banks and telcos, each had something to contribute, and more importantly, they needed something from the other players. And so that's kind of the model that's been unfolding in Canada with this whole digital identity ecosystem. So it takes all of them to make it work. And so what we are very familiar with is in the identity and access management space, we've all become very familiar with this trade-off between velocity and trust. And banks are kind of stuck in a bad place where they're low velocity. I don't go to the government a lot, but they need high trust to serve me. And so this thing we did with Concierge in Canada really helped sort out that problem. Now that I'm using my bank account to get to government, you can piggyback on a high assurance credential that's also high velocity, and this has really solved the problem for government in Canada. In fact, it's taken their cost down by 80%, from $1 billion down to $200 million for the subsequent contract period. And so what often gets missed in these identity ecosystem discussions is the user, and what the user attitude is towards what's going on. So we have the two axes, trust and velocity, but the third thing we need to consider is how the user is thinking about this. And so when you think, I'm using a plug number that, you can use it whatever number you want, but 130 destinations that a user on average is going to, the number actually doesn't matter. What's important is that users don't treat them all the same. So as an example, I go to Etsy. I like Etsy and everything, but I don't care about Etsy. If I lost access to it, I would just get another Etsy account. I don't care. They don't have anything in there that I care about, so I'll just get another account. Then I got stuff in the middle that I kind of care about. I spent time friending all of you folks, and when the crook takes over my Facebook account, and he says, Andre's stuck in Bahamas, please send $10,000. I want to warn you, that's not me, and I don't want you to send the money. So I'm going to spend some time trying to get my Facebook account back. But in the end, if I can't get it back, I'll just get another one and tell you that other guy's not me. And then at the other end of the spectrum is the stuff that users really care about. So they have self-interest at heart. And the list of things that people have that they're really self-interested in is actually quite small. And I think in order for this to be effective, it has to be things that people are using often, and ideally their physical possessions as well. And so in my view, the three things, this is not the list, it's the list I think makes sense from a strong credential point of view. So the things consumers care about is their phone. It's a physical thing, and if you weren't here right now, you'd be over at the carrier telling the carrier you lost your phone and turn off the SIM card and do the remote wipe. Your bank account is like that. You know when you can't get into your bank account, you know you haven't forgotten. You know there's a problem. You're going to go to the bank and tell them. So what that does is transform and eliminate the attack window the crook has because you're going to do the right thing. And your driver's license is like that too. You can't get in the hotel tonight. You can't rent a car. You can't do Airbnb. You can't without your driver's license. And so these three things are all consumers have them, and they all care about them because they need it for their daily life. And because users will do the right thing when they lose them, that means the attack windows the crook has is actually quite small. And so that's where integrity is going to come from. And so that's how we're going to make this whole ecosystem work, is look at the different things that consumers have and that require trust and put those things together so consumers can get what they want. In the presentation I did earlier today, I was talking about this ecosystem play. And so in order for this to work, we need a network effective use cases. Users have to have enough things that they can do with the service to make them bother signing up in the first place. And merchants need to know enough consumers have this stuff pre-equipped so that they can show up and get the service. From a government perspective in particular, in Canada, 99% of the adult population has a bank account. But from a service delivery point of view, that is not enough. We need to get to 100. We need 100% coverage or it's not interesting. That's kind of how government thinks about it. And so we need to get to a model where users can choose their favorite provider to show up for service. And when you think about how the credit card model works, there's a plurality of providers. You have your favorite bank, and I have my favorite bank, and those same types of choices are available to people in other countries. And it's this plurality of providers that gets us to this 100% number, because everybody can choose their favorite provider. And if you all of a sudden hate your current provider and you want to change, you can continue on as you were. So we need identity to work that way. So that's what this whole model is about. Is in Canada, 14 million Canadians actually have an online mobile banking account. So when the service launches later this year, 14 million people are pre-equipped, participate in the service. So now the goal is to make sure that there's enough for them to do with it, that they can go to enough destinations to solve problems in their life, because they can't, they're not going to bother. So this is all about the network effect, getting the endpoints there so that consumers can show up there. And from the merchant point of view or the business point of view, is making sure that there's not consumers that have this, that it's worth their while to actually invest and connect to the service. Okay, so that's the journey we've been on in Canada. Now I want to tell you about what's in front of us. So we, as an industry, love to talk about ecosystems. But the truth is, nobody buys an ecosystem. So how is this going to work? So what I like to compare this to is the electrical grid in 1870. Prior to 1870, we had no electrical grid. Only the biggest organizations had generators, and the only reason they had the generators so they could light the light bulb, so they could keep the factory running longer. That was what the original use case for electricity was. And around 1870, some salesperson from the grid came along to all these organizations and say, hey, join the grid, you can get rid of the generator. And at that time, there was two versions of yes and two versions of no that were kind of occurring. The first version of yes was the small guys, the people who couldn't afford the generator. It was an easy decision. I'm in, I can compete with the big guys now because I can join this and get the electrical capacity too, which means I can run my factory longer too. The second version of yes was the guys who had the generator, but they hated it. The thing was always breaking down, and the guy who ran it was boozing up all the time, so it was just like a total pain in the butt. They didn't want the thing anymore. So those guys said, I'm in too. But in 1870, there was also two versions of no. The first version of no was, I love your generator idea, but I just bought mine, and I don't want to do this until I've depreciated the darn thing. So that was the first version of no. And the second version of no was, I like my generator. It keeps me independent. There's nobody between me and my capacity to produce my goods. What happened in the end? Everybody joined the grid. That's what happened, right? What's interesting is once we had cheap, abundant, and reliable electricity, the number of use cases for electricity went through the roof. Where we are today is every web service on the planet is running its own digital identity generator. That's where we are. And so where we are today in trying to make this transformation is we're getting two versions of yes and two versions of no. But what we know in the end is everybody's going to join this digital identity grid because there's no way you can get away with not doing it. We see the current models produce the result that we have. When everybody acts independent, we get these huge databases which breach risks on the one side and consumer frustration on the other. So the model is going to change and everybody's going to join. What's more interesting is that once we have cheap, abundant, reliable identity, the number of use cases for identity is going to go through the roof as well, and it's going to transform the economy. So that's our view of what's going to happen. So how are people going to get in? How are they going to participate in a network like this? Well, the short version is you're going to be able to get into this model by using your bank account and your carrier and your driver's license to equip yourself to get your own digital ID. You're going to start by logging in with your bank the same way you do every day for online banking. And when you want to take it a step further, you can actually verify that your cell phone number against what you said to the bank. You told your bank, my name is Andre and my cell phone number is 647-287. So we ask permission for you to share the information you got from your bank to compare that with what the carrier has on file. When you put your finger on Touch ID, we share the information from your bank to the carrier, and the carrier comes back and says, yep, the phone belongs to Andre Boysen. This is his registered phone number. More importantly, the SIM card that's in the phone that's executing this app is Andre Boysen's. So it's not any phone in the universe, it's Andre Boysen's phone. So at the end of this process, we've got something that the bank says it's me, the carrier says it's me, and just for a moment, you can imagine we could do the third step, which is bring your driver's license to do the same thing, and maybe even your credit score. And so once we've done that, we can start doing some really cool things. In Canada, we have a service called Kijiji. It's very much like Craigslist. And today the challenge is that we've got a double trust issue. When I go to an apartment, I don't know who this person is, who this landlord is. For all I know, this person has rented the place for the weekend through Airbnb, and he's pulling a scam on me to get me to give him 2 months' rent. I don't know if the landlord's the landlord or if he has authority to rent the place. The landlord in their place wants to know who I am. They want to know I'm a credible risk and that I am who I claim to be. And so we've got a double-sided trust issue here that we need to solve if we want to kind of do this in a digital way. And so today, the way the landlords solve this problem is they pay a month's rent to a real estate agent to go sort this out. Go find out what his credit score is, get his employment history, and check his credit score. When you got all of that, come back, and I'll do a deal with Andre. That's kind of how it works today. And so I can't use my power as a consumer to close the deal in the apartment because I've got to wait for all this stuff to happen. There's this big delay. And so if we could get to a place where I can actually prove who I am, and I say I agree in the apartment that I want this thing, I can sign the lease right there on my phone, close the deal, and I can actually give them first and last month's rent, and I can sign up for internet in the apartment, and I can get insurance at the same time. This is what cheap, abundant, and reliable identity is going to do for consumers. It's going to take all of this pain and friction away from you. More importantly, it's going to take cost out of the system. The landlord here is going to take their cost from $1,000 down to like 10 or 15, depending on how much information they need. So an order or two orders of magnitude in savings for the landlord here. And so you multiply this use case against all the things you're doing in your life every single day, we can take all these service registration costs down by an order of magnitude. That's what the digital identity grid is going to do. And so this is not a story about SecureKey and what we're doing. This is a story about Canada. And so what have happened in Canada is that every organization who's participating in this has recognized digital identity is bigger than their own organization. So if we're going to make this work, we have to do it on a cooperative basis. And so when you think about it, that's actually how real ID works. In the real world, when I go to a service, they say bring government-issued ID and something that proves where you live. And so what we're doing is replicating this model that we have for in-person identity and bringing it to digital identity. And so what's good about this is that consumers are trained up and accept they've got to make these trades to get these things they want, and there's a proportionality amount of information you're releasing that makes sense for the thing that you're trying to get. And the second thing is that businesses also are equipped to operate this way. So what we need to do simply is overcome the deficiencies with this model, which is the first deficiencies. When I go to a destination service, the destination can't tell if I've changed the document since it was given to me. Did I Photoshop my address to get, fool my way into an entitlement that I otherwise wouldn't get? And then the other problem is that what Ontario really wanted to know from me at the time is where I live, but what they get is a bank statement or a telco statement. So they get to see everybody I phone, or they get to see everybody I do business with, and all they really wanted to know was where I live. So we're over-answering questions, so we can improve on the privacy in this model too. And so this is the digital identity ecosystem story that's been unfolding in Canada. SecureKey gets a lot of light put on us because we're kind of orchestrating all this, but it's not a story about SecureKey. It's a story about Canada, all these organizations recognizing if they want better digital identity, they're going to have to cooperate. And you're going to have to bring in and co-opt the consumers so they can participate too. And so that's what's happening in Canada. And so we're at a place now where this concierge service I talked about at the beginning has been in the market now for 6 years now. And so this authentication thing has been transformational for the government. As I said, it's taken their cost down, increased the transaction volume, and the number of users online has gone way up too. And just anecdotal evidence, we're talking to customers in our network about this identity service. Like if you want to get a new cell phone, today a counter visit to get a new cell phone is about an hour. You got to wait for your turn at the counter, and that's 45 minutes of scratching out papers and filling out documents. That costs them like $50 or $60. And so with this model, you're going to get 45 minutes of your time back. You're not going to have to sit in the store to prove your identity. And they can take their cost down from 45 minutes down to a few seconds, but it's all done digitally. So an order of magnitude in savings, that's just one kind of use case. So it's interesting, we get asked a lot, who pays for this? How's this all going to work? Well, the current model, in person, is the destination pays. Every destination today covers its own enrollment costs. In this future model that we're trying to get to, it's going to work the same way. They're going to pay their own freight. What's beautiful about this, though, it's going to take their cost down by an order of magnitude. That's why they want to participate, because it's going to be so much cheaper for them. So we think this is going to really help move the economy along, make it easier for consumers, and this cheap, abundant, reliable identity is going to make the economy speed up just the way electricity did and also the way credit cards did. We saw when credit cards came into the market, commerce took off. When we solved this double-sided problem, the merchant and the consumer trying to trade on a check, the credit card solved all that. And so this model does the same thing now for identity. And so DIAC is an organization. It's the Digital Identity Authentication Council of Canada. And it was brought into being because the finance minister in 2008, Jim Flaherty, kind of said, hey, if we're going to make digital payments take off, we're not going to be able to do this without digital identity. And so that led to the creation of DIAC, which has been around since 2009, I think, or we started in 2009. I've been involved in all of this time, along with all these other organizations, figured how are we going to create this cooperative model. And so this DIAC story is how digital identity has been successful in Canada. We have the working model with concierge in the marketplace, but now there's a lot of collaboration happening inside Canada and even across borders. We're doing a very cool proof of concept now at DIAC with the UK Verify folks. They've done a lot of work to do enrollments with their IDPs in UK. And so the concept we're working on DIAC right now is the idea is that somebody who's enrolled for UK Verify and has a valid IDP can, at a proof of concept level, create a bank account in Canada in a way that will meet the KYC and AML burden of a bank here in Canada. And so that's an example of the collaboration and the action that's starting to happen now in Canada, because we get these proof of concepts and ideas to prove them out. And once we've got the proof and the learnings, we take that a step further and actually launch it into market. So that's how digital identity has unfolded in Canada. We've had the place of, kind of the journey we were on, which is discovering what each of the players had to contribute. We know that now. And now we're on the next step, which is actually building out the grid so everybody can connect, so consumers can get the things that they want in a safe and trustworthy way with privacy. That's the Canada story. So I'm going to stop there and see if I have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. So I'll ask the loaded question. You guys have a great success in Canada with what you're doing. Do you think that's possible to get replicated in the U.S.? And what are the obstacles to doing something like what you guys have accomplished in Canada and the U.S.?
So that's a great question. Two things I've learned on this identity journey as I've been going around the world talking to different organizations and players is that the first is that identity is sovereign. Every country wants the identity to be local. They don't want to be beholden to some foreign corporation. So every country wants the servers in the country, if I can be really blunt. The second thing I've learned is that identity is very cultural. So what works in Estonia may not work in Norway, which may not work in Canada. For example, the key underpinning of the Estonian model, which was, I have a lot of respect for what Estonia did, but it would not work in any Commonwealth country. A national ID card would be the political death of anybody who tried to bring it into being. And so we've got to find a way to make this story work for every country. So in Canada, we have a bank-led model. In the US, we may find it's a carrier-led model. As we go to UK, maybe it's a bank-led model again. Maybe Australia is bank-led. We might find in some African countries it's a government-led model. So this model has flexibility about who the anchor is. You need all of the players, but we're flexible about who the anchor is so countries can make this story their own. And so there's a SecureKey element, which is taking the commercial element of this around the world, but there's also the DIAC story of taking the trust framework we've built and applying it to these other countries. We can share our learnings of how we applied it to us. Other countries can say, I like your story, I'm going to do something different. I like your story, I want to copy, or I want to join DIAC too. And so that's kind of the journey we're on now, is just sharing what's happened in Canada. What we don't want in Canada, selfishly, is we don't want to get boxed out where other countries do something else, and we're kind of done our own thing, and then we've got to change. No country wants to be in that position. That's why we're sharing our story.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
So, Andre, I would like to ask, in this case where you have described seamless login and everything being connected, what happens if there is identity theft? How seriously are you thinking about securing the identity of the
It's a great question. And so one of the challenges for service delivery organizations today, when I go to my CRA or my IRS account and I can't get in, because I haven't been there for a year, my immediate conclusion is I forgot. That's what I think. And when the truth is a crook has taken over my account, they get a free ride because I think I forgot. I don't tell the government because I just think I forgot. So fraud goes undetected and it runs a long way. The way to solve that is get back to that slide I was showing around motivation to recover. If, for example, I couldn't get into my bank account today, I know I haven't forgotten. I know for certain that that's not the issue. And so I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be over at the bank trying to sort this out. And so what's good about the banks is they have branches in every corner of the country, and I can just walk in and get it done. I contrast that to IRS. I don't even know how to get IRS on the phone to tell them, hey, I forgot my password. And so the user motivation, the user will notice quickly when there's a problem, and more importantly, they have self-interest to reset it, not because they promised the bank they would, because they're terrified they're going to lose their money or someone's going to take a line of credit in their name. And so it's this user motivation that's going to provide the integrity and overcome this identity theft issue. But I just want to build on that point a little bit more. The challenge we have today is that identity today is all card not present. If I know enough about you, I can be you. And so the way to solve that, if we can start anchoring identity in real stuff users care about, like their cell phone as an example, then all the sock puppets are gone. Because in order to get in, you've got to have my phone, you've got to know my password, you've got to overcome the security on the phone, and prevent me from turning it off. And so the bar for that is not zero, but it's like way, way better than where we are today with a password at every destination service that you go to. And when you think about it, that's what keeps the global payment system safe. The fact that you possess the card, you know the PIN, most importantly, the real user who owns that card will call the bank and say they lost it as soon as they notice. That's what keeps the global payment system safe. This is designed on the same principles as anchoring this in stuff users care about. Does that answer your question?
Hey, hi, Andre. Thanks.
Leah,
So
go easy on me.
I am. Don't worry. I'm gonna add to your story and say that one of the reasons those BC folks figured out a bunch of stuff is they came to IIW a lot, right?
Yep.
So like these places where we're workshopping and innovating. So if you guys don't know, you're all invited to the Internet Identity Workshop. Our next one's in October. But I had a question, which is like, what about delegation in the Canadian system?
Yeah, that's a great question.
We're talking about, the use cases are like adults who are together and run their own devices, but there's disabled people, elders, kids. So how are those use cases dealt with in the system?
So I want to do two things here. One is that we're working on this at DIAC to solve that exact problem. And we've created a new category of transactions we call on behalf of, where you're acting on someone else's behalf. And so what we need is a mechanism to encode your authorization for a particular task, whether you're a parent or you have a power of attorney over a spouse, or you're acting on behalf of somebody else as a lawyer, as a doctor, as an accountant, or if you're even acting on behalf of your own business. When I act on behalf of SecureKey, I'm not doing it as Andre, I'm doing it as an executive officer at SecureKey. And so what we're looking at is figuring out how to model on behalf of transactions, because that allows us to deal the personal use case where I need to act on behalf of a parent, a spouse, or a child. And more importantly, it also allows us to get to business registrations, which is another big unsolved problem. And so we're certainly working on that at DIAC, but we do continue, a lot of the members in DIAC continue to come to IIW because it's a great forum to have these discussions. And so that's how we're going to get at it, Clea. Joni.
Hey, Andre.
So Joni is our DIAC CEO and president, and so I'm so glad she's here. So thank you for coming, Joni.
Thanks, Andre. Yes, I'm here. So I wanted to add a couple of things. First of all, I really appreciate the presentation. I want to reiterate it is a Canadian story, but I think it's a global story and it's a collaborative story. So that's really great. And to Kalia's question around delegation, one of the things that we're, I think, doing a bit differently is in our framework, we're treating delegation as a specific functionality and digging in on that as well as consent. So we're paying honor to each of these types of functions. And then the other piece that may not have come out here is that our framework considers verified people, verified organizations, and verified digital relationships. And you get that on behalf of quite often when you're an employee acting on behalf of an organization. And part of the reason we have that trifecta of verification is because we think it represents the digital economy and the way people actually interact in the digital world for a basis of trust. So the last thing that I'll do shyly is I'm talking about the DIAC framework at 10:40 on Thursday. So if you want to hear all about the details of what we're doing, come join me in Michigan on Thursday. But thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, so tools and rules with Joni on Thursday. So if you want to hear more about all these ideas that I just laid out, the trust framework kind of sets out how we do this at a national level. So I encourage you to come and see Joni on Thursday. I'll be there too. So I want to make sure we get Phil on the stage because I don't want to take his time. So thank you, everybody, and I'm around for questions later.
Thank you.